So good morning. Welcome everybody to the Social Housing Roundtable, first one in December of 2023. I did genuinely look at the year there. I think it's that's one of those at the moment. Really excited about today because it's the most guest speakers we've had on the roundtable, or would have been apart from last week. But it's nice to kind of get multiple viewpoints. Those who don't know me, my name's Matthew Baird. And like a number of our guests today, I've worked in recruitment in housing for a considerable period of time. And I know normally we do the spiel at the beginning, but the idea behind today was that we're trying to bring together recruitment professionals to get rid of that kind of ego that often you find with some agencies, to leave those kind of at the door, as it were, as well as get internal recruitment people in to really discuss the state of recruitment at the moment in social housing, what's going well, what unfortunately isn't, and where we can really improve the process. Because the one thing that keeps coming up over and over again is that recruitment is more difficult than it's probably ever been in the sector. And we're going to come on to some of those key themes today. So we've got 4 guest speakers with us today. I've got Emma Hillier from Platform Housing. We've got Anna Ganapathy from Grand Union, Barry Forsyth from Greenacre, and Emma, I've lost Ellie, there she is. I was just trying to find you on the screen. Ellie Benson from DK Recruitment. I've worked with kind of all 4 people in various capacities over the last few years. Barry and I met a sleep out in the cold about 5 years ago. So there's a number of different kind of views and stories that have come through. But the important thing from today was to really open up the discussion and to have a really honest and authentic conversation around actually what the whole sector needs to do to improve the processes and overcome some of the challenges we're having. So without further ado, I'm going to pass across to Emma first. I'll get you all to introduce yourself as you open up your bit, because I know we've got kind of a few moments on with each person. And Emma's going to talk about the transition Platform's gone, particularly over the last few years, in terms of setting up that internal process. So Emma, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, nice to meet everybody. So I'm Emma from Platform Housing Group. I'm the resourcing manager. So I run an in-house recruitment team at Platform, which is part of our HR department. It was a move we took 3 years ago to specialise the recruitment activity at Platform. So previously it was held by the HR team alongside all the other things that HR have to do. So it wasn't necessarily given the attention that it needed to be given. So the decision was made. I was also a part of that HR team previously, so transitioned across to a recruitment only role, and I must say the learning curve was quite steep. I didn't realise how much I didn't realise as a generalist HR person was involved in recruitment when you do it as a specialist area. So I think some of the key learnings I'm happy to share today is really around the internal processes we've had to change. It's a very candidate-led market. It remains a candidate-led market, and I think top talent isn't waiting around for jobs to come along. We're having to kind of be quite quick off the mark if we see people that we like the look of. We've had to remove some of our kind of cumbersome processes. So we had quite long-winded recruitment processes, so a couple of stage interviews, and certainly the traditional approach of running an advert for 2 weeks, maybe even longer, and then a week of shortlisting, a week of interviewing, and then eventually an offer. And we were finding, particularly in the private sector, where we were trying to attract some people from, there were offers being made within a week of applying, and so we just weren't fast enough. And so we really needed to get moving, and that was a big piece around kind of influencing our managers to understand the market that we were now in. And I know Anna's going to talk a little bit more about kind of that journey she's been on with her managers, so I don't want to say too much about that, but certainly we needed to talk about kind of also look at the data. So we weren't particularly data driven. So I spent a lot of my first year probably just looking at kind of what was going well, where were we getting the people from that we'd already hired. It wasn't that we weren't hiring people, we were. It just was, where were they coming from, and what backgrounds were working for us, which channels were working for us. So there was a heavier reliance on agency use, I would say 3 years ago. It's definitely come down in recent years as we've invested in the in-house kind of function. I do appreciate that for some companies that isn't an option because the funding isn't there, or the budgets don't allow for that kind of in-house function. But I think even if you get one person to focus on recruitment solely, even if it's a more junior person, maybe a coordinator or something, then that can pay dividends in terms of somebody focusing on the application numbers that you're getting, the journey the candidates are going through, and kind of that candidate experience. So I think the sector's pretty good at treating people well. We're well known to be a nice sector to work for in terms of being family friendly and things like that. So our candidate experience needs to show that. and that we're sort of people matter. I know it's one of platform's values, but I think it genuinely applies across the sector, is that, you know, we care about people. That's what we're here to do. So let's let our candidates see that and feel that through the candidate experience, really.
And I know, Emma, you had a journey there with obviously the group structure. So the company, you know, the group has grown and grown, mergers have gone on and the rest of it. And I know when we were talking before, that's been an interesting piece from a recruitment perspective to try and get on top of.
Yeah, definitely. So we're now recruiting in locations we never really recruited in before. So I'm personally from the Fortis Living arm of the business, where we benefited from quite a strong brand in our localities because we were quite well known. It's a fairly small location in terms of just being sort of Herefordshire, Worcestershire, Gloucestershire. It wasn't massively big. Then became Platform, and the Waterloo arm of the business hadn't done as much recruitment as we had. So there wasn't as, you know, it wasn't as prominent. We weren't as well known. And even if we were known, people didn't know we were now called Platform. So we had to kind of rebrand ourselves and kind of get ourselves back out there, and particularly in the property care arm, the trades. We did huge investment there. We've grown the workforce massively in that area, but we were recruiting in far out places I'd never even heard of. It wasn't unheard of on my phone while I was trying to recruit, because I don't actually know what that place is. So yeah, that was quite challenging at times to kind of get ourselves known in different locations.
And in terms of just before kind of we move on through the people today, so with those internal restructure and things along those lines, how were you finding when people were coming in? Were they understanding what Platform was as a business, or were those kind of, did they know it as Waterloo and the rest of it? How do people internally?
Early on, we were still feeling that yeah, we used to be this, we used to be that, and we had to remind people we were still the same business, but just obviously bigger and hopefully better in some cases. So, you know, a case of just kind of explaining the journey we've been on. I think certainly more recently we're trying not to use those legacy terms as much. I think the brand is a bit more well established now, sort of 3-4 years on. So but certainly early on we did definitely have to like nod back to the previous organizations so that people knew that it wasn't brand new. We've got this long history, we've got stability because we have been around a long time. So it was getting the messaging right around the growth as well. So it's a positive spin on it's a growing company. It's a good news story, not necessarily a negative thing to worry about.
I will come back to you shortly because I want to talk to you a lot as well about the community piece, which I know we'll come on to in a bit, around kind of actually what you've done with that brand, because from a retention piece, that's made a real difference. But Anna, I'm going to bring you in to focus a little bit on what Emma's mentioned there around that challenge sometimes, because I think certainly in a recruitment world and sometimes from a management perspective as well, recruitment is just seen as being done by someone else, and the need to kind of get those relationships right, but also for internal managers sometimes to understand that relationship with agencies is so vital. So yeah, please introduce yourself. It's great to have you with us today.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Anna Ganapathy. I'm the talent acquisition and recruitment manager here at Grand Union Housing Group. Been here now 5 years. And it's been challenging, influencing. I think so. Grand Union haven't had a lot of change in the last 20 years. And being a charity, I keep hearing, well, we don't invest in recruitment. HR do, you know, they'll put an application out or an advert, and then we get people. A lot of our recruitment was very technical, so it wasn't valued based, wasn't behavior based, and we just weren't getting the right people in. Plus, we were spending 400,000 on agencies versus, you know, a population of only 300 at the time. So it was very hard to influence. But I've written some notes to kind of how I did it, how myself and our recruitment assistant started to make the change. So the first thing is, whoever you report to as recruitment, you need to have that cheerleader. So, you know, it's about getting that buy-in from my director of HR. She has a seat at the table on a lot of those leadership tables. So it's making sure she lives and breathes recruitment as well. A lot of the directors, they have us because we're specialists and we know everything, we know what we're doing, but they need to know what you're doing. They need to be able to sit there and talk about it with the other leaders to kind of, if you're not in those meetings, to be able to help and influence those leaders and get those minds changing. It's also, you know, we never had a recruitment team, so it was a lot of HR, so I had to come in and build that recruitment team from scratch. So it was about, what is that recruitment vision? What is that strategy? So it all feeds in under the people strategy, which then feeds under your corporate plan. But what's your vision? Where are you guys going? What does that look like? You need to get that buy-in. So your director has to buy it. The business needs to buy it. So we then came up with that recruitment vision, which was employer of choice. So non-for-profits have a bit of a stigma. We're not an employer of choice. So for my role is I need to make sure that we, we're out there in social media. We are an employer of choice, and this is what we do. So then once kind of we know what that vision is, it's time for, literally guys, it's time from the basics. We had to figure out what the recruitment function is going to be, what ATS systems we're going to use, building that foundation, what is the application process, what is the one-to-one process, is it an interview, is it telephone screening, what does video interviewing, what does that look like? Because we had a 6-page application, so we could see our dropout rate just fall. So it's about getting that department to where it needs to be, because for you to influence those leaders, you need to make sure that your recruitment department is in check. You've got the right people at the right places, and then you're doing, you've got your right headhunters that are going to headhunt. You've got your sources that are going to source your candidates. You then got that candidate experience. So do we get back to people? What do you say to them when you decline them? It's making sure that's all in check. And then it was about setting up. I noticed a lot of my managers weren't great at doing interviews, so I would be part of those interviews, and it was tiring, and there were loads of interviews, and I found that we were losing great candidates because we weren't even doing so there was a rule in Grand Union: you don't probe, and if you do probe, you need to probe every single candidate. Whatever you do for one, you do for the other. So again, that recruitment education. So we did I set up a lot of lunch and learns, so a lot of recruitment clinics. We did training, which they had to be signed off, so you couldn't do any recruitment until you were signed off. So we did a lot of that. We, recruitment started to get their names out there. We then started to have a seat at that table. I then started to get hiring managers and directors involved in their recruitment. So before that ATR, before that form is signed off, it's about, right, it's getting HR, the director and the hiring manager together. Let's talk about your recruitment. Who do we have? Who do we have internal? Have we exhausted all the internals? It's about then looking at my recruitment assistant. Do we have any passive candidates that we've got on talent pool that you have started to source and headhunt ready for the roles? Once we've done that, then it's about sitting down with them, talking about data. So data is really important. It's about us telling that story. So ChatGPT, guys, cheating is very good. Put a role out there. You have to program it in the right way. So can you tell me how many HR managers are in the vicinity of Milton Keynes? Can you, the system can tell you that data. Also, you can look at Azuna. Zuna is another fantastic site. Go on there. It gives you market intelligence of every role, salary and everything. So again, getting the leaders involved in what's out there, the salary that you've given me. Okay, so you've given me the salary that I'm going to advertise versus the salary. You want a Ferrari, but you've only given me money for a Ford Fiesta. So it's about, okay, how am I going to do this? So it's about giving them that data. So they've got that buy-in in you. They know what you're talking about. They see that passion. And then it's about, okay, I'll advertise it. It's giving them that advice, but I'm not going to be able to buy that Ferrari on that salary. So it's about thinking creatively. So we're currently recruiting a director. I know I'm not going to get a director of IT because of how small we are. So it's about having those conversations. Look, I can get you ahead of someone who's fantastic, someone who's got the right leadership, the great coaching skills. However, they could be doing the IT role, but it won't be director level because we can't afford it. And it's about, here you go, I'll give you a director and I'll give you a head of, you tell me what you want. And sometimes they will shift on salary. Normally in housing, I've been told they never shift, this is what it is. But actually, once you've done that research, once you've got them engaged, you've got them in charge of their recruitment, they do really get passionate about it. And then it's about showing them, right, here you go, you've interviewed, we'll interview this and I'll give you this. Also, sometimes it's about, they might not want to take your advice. We can only advise, and I say to them, I can only advise. I've only been doing this job 15 years, but, and sometimes recruiters, we have to let them make the mistake. So I've spent a lot of money and I have to let them make the mistakes for them to know. That's when you start to kind of win those hearts and minds, because then they say, do you know what? I should have listened to them. They won't admit it, but they'll say, I should have listened to them. Going forward, they then do listen to you. They then do kind of, right, what do you think we should pay them? And, can you do this research for me? And even to the point that, you're not in those interviews, but even the exec team will say, well, what do you think? What do you think? So you started to get that buy-in, you're starting to get that influence in. So that's kind of, so it's getting them involved, because I'm going to be honest, our roles is not to sit there and our roles is to attract people into the business, to get you set up for success, to make sure our hiring managers are great interviewers that are seeking out the right questions to get the right answers. That's our roles. Our roles is not even sit there to headhunt. They need to get that, they need to go out and headhunt. So property managers, surveyors, get them by buying into you, get that they go out and do visits, get them going on construction sites, get them, giving them their cards, get them to spot talent for you guys. So it's not just the recruit, just because we're recruiters doesn't mean it's our jobs. Our jobs is to do the employer branding, to get the systems ready, to get the best that we can from our systems, to attract people in, but it's also kind of the hiring manager's responsibility. So we have a lot of meetings and we do everything together. It's not just recruitment. And that's it, really. That's kind of the biggest thing, is building those relationships. So the two things for me that influencing, once you start to build those hearts and minds, and you've got business cases and you've got that seat at the table, you can go and you can talk to, I'll go and whisper to the 3 execs, I'll give them an idea, they'll tell me what they think, I then go to the directors individually, they'll give me all their opinions, and then I build my business case, and then it just gets signed off, because then I've done that stakeholder management. They've got that trust in me, they know that we deliver as a team and we go over and above, we think creatively, we sit down, we have honest conversations. Some of them are very uncomfortable, some of them are not, but once you win their heart and mind, they start to become really comfortable. So the two things for me is communication is a big thing. They've never been communicated. They weren't part of it. It was kind of us and them. It's about, working together as a unit. We're one business, and kind of, we're both trying to get, we're both trying to achieve the same goal. And the other thing is just remember, they're operators. Our hiring directors or managers, they're operators. They don't want to hear they just want their people, top line information. And that's what I feel kind of helped me to influence the directors. And now I've got an amazing chief exec. Directors are amazing. They always come and seek advice. And I just feel like we are important now. We're not that recruitment function when they didn't really care about, or they didn't have one. We have a seat at that table. So it's nice to kind of be part of that.
Thank you, Anna. And I know the journey you guys and both Emma and yourself have been on through the last few years, especially, has been a significant change. And we'll come back to it in a bit with COVID and everything that's changed with hybrid working and retention and everything that comes in that. But also, I mean, I know both of you have mentioned agency spend, but you're both still open to understanding of working with agencies and recruiters. And when you say recruiters, you mean the collective. But again, we'll come on to it in a bit. That piece around working with agencies is really, really imperative, both for candidates and for clients. So we'll come back to that in a bit. I'm going to go on to Barry. So those who don't know, Barry from Greenacre, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but Barry's going to talk to us about standing out from the crowd and best practice. So Barry, over to you.
Thank you very much, Matt. Good to see everybody. So I'm Barry Forsyth. I am a director at Greenacre. I specialise in recruiting to exec roles within social housing, but also manage a sort of recruitment team that covers all other areas. Been recruiting to housing since 2002, or 533 housing ministers ago, depends on how you sort of look at sort of time. So really, I've only got a few sort of simple points, I suppose, to look at. Not everybody's sort of privileged enough, I suppose, to have dedicated recruitment teams like Emma and Anna. And so often recruitment then you tend to have to fit around your day job. And let's be honest, the day job is probably quite busy anyway. So for me, it's about sort of simplicity, but also making sure, and both Emma and Anna talked about that sort of candidate or sort of applicant journey, making sure that they don't see that you're having to fit this around. It needs to be as slick a process as possible. In order to stand out, everybody, what usually happens, and you've probably all sort of experienced it, somebody's left or a new job's created, and you go, right, okay, let's get an advert out, let's go and find somebody. And that's often as much thinking that goes into it, and it probably shouldn't be. For me, attraction should actually probably start before you actually need to bring anybody on board. if you can, whether you're a manager, create a culture within your team, or if you have the influence to create a culture within your business where everybody is an ambassador. So whether that's encouraging people to attend conferences, speak at conferences, which gets the branding out, whether it's about getting involved in things like this, networking, benchmarking, reaching outside of your own organizations. Often people will leave it too late, even if it's somebody who's then looking for a job themselves. They've often been so ingrained or entrenched in their own organization, they've forgotten to network outside of that. And so actually they may have been, a big cheese in their own organization, but actually outside of that are possibly relatively unknown. And it's the same kind of thing from an organizational context. I don't know whether it's sort of the British sensibility, but also there's lots of organizations that do some great work, but don't necessarily promote that outside of the business. So whether it's on LinkedIn or on social or at conferences, these kind of things, I think we need to talk about that. Not only, so that it will come across as boasting. You don't necessarily want, but actually it can be improved, it can be shared, it can be, enhanced, I suppose. Housing organizations aren't necessarily competitors with each other, and the tenants live where they live. And so actually that sharing of best practice is done in pockets, but could be done a huge amount more. But also what that will do is help with your attraction. And I think just that sort of encouraging your staff or your teams to have a social presence helps when you're then advertising jobs. So what you tend to have, those people who have a bit about them will go, we've put a job out, can you share those jobs on your social channels? If they don't put anything else out other than jobs, there's probably going to be very little benefit to doing that anyway. So actually, as long as people have a social presence, people are then listening. If people are listening to those people, then when those jobs do come out, then you're going to get more of an uptake. So there's a big piece for me around making sure that you become that employer of choice and that perception even before you're putting jobs out there. When you're then in a point to go out to recruit, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, and this might be quite simplistic, but do recruitment in the right order. So many people will come to me and go, we need this, here's our advert or whatever, or, can you get an advert out? And we'll then start talking about, right, what is it that you're wanting? What sort of person do you want? What's the process? What's your timelines? All of this lot. And they go, oh, I don't know. Well, what you actually need to do is do that stuff before you even come to us, or going to do it yourself. So establish what the need is. If somebody leaves, don't just go dust off the JD from 1933, but actually look at that. Does that person still do that job? Do you need that person to still do that job? Do you, has your organization changed in any way? Is there a chance to sort of pivot a little bit, especially now with us working in different ways? There's an opportunity to sort of upgrade that. So work out what that is. What is it that you need? What are the team dynamics? Where are your gaps? And then look at how you go about that. So then design the brief as to what it is that you're looking to achieve. When you then know what you're looking to achieve, you can then build the right process. The amount of times I have conversations with people, sort of candidates who are frustrated by a process going, I've been asked to jump through 13 hoops for this job, and I don't see what they're trying to assess for this job that I'm doing, because the process has been designed as a one template. This is what you need to do in our organization. And actually it's not assessing, a customer service person or a marketing person isn't going to be needing the same skills as a data or an IT person. And it's kind of understanding that. Only at that point should you then be drafting an advert and putting that out. Once you know what the process is, and everybody's online, you've got the stakeholders diaries booked in, that's when you then go out, because that's when you're then in front of the market, and the market is now assessing you. And so they'll be assessing what the advert looks like, what the messaging's like, what the process looks like, all of these things. Those are the questions you need to answer, because when people are asking those questions, if you don't know the answers, that's when you start to lose people from the process. And then, as I say, sort of run through that process. The other part around sort of attraction, which is key, is around sort of the advertising of that. So it's a really noisy space. It's a really competitive market. There's a skills gap. You know, we're all fighting over the same talent. So you need to stand out. Now, a template, you know, this is how we do it, and we're just going to change a few to-dos in an advert, is not going to let you stand out. If anything, you're homogenizing all of your roles in your organization. And so you want to avoid, in my mind, you want to avoid templates. I'd also say you probably want to avoid sort of corporate speak, internal jargon, any of sort of things that are going to create a barrier between you and the applicant. You want to speak directly to the person that you're trying to attract, and that's where that previous work comes in. You know, really important. The first paragraph in an advert should speak to that person. It should not be, this is who we are. People do not at that moment care who you are. However, for some reason, that's what everybody does. This is who we are. This is great. You'll want to work for us. Well, actually, you've not got my attention yet. So you're speaking into an abyss. That first, you need to focus on them. What working with you would be to make their lives better. What is going to improve their situation. Then you can start talking about yourself as an organization and what the role actually is. The other part is avoid. Don't just take the job description and go, right, what are the top 5 things? Let's cut and paste that in there. You want to tell a story about you as an organization, the role, and that side of things. Nowadays, so much sort of corporate advertising, if you look out there, is now no longer about the thing. It's about storytelling, and that's what's going to be the hook. No, don't make it War and Peace, because we've got very short attention spans. But it is about sort of painting that picture, really. The other part is making sure you're advertising in the right place. Lots of people will go, well, we advertise here, here, and here. And I'm going, well, it's all well and good you advertising in, you know, the local newspaper. Very few people find a job in the local newspaper now. Or we always advertise on Inside Housing. That's great. However, what you're asking me to find you, or, you know, what you're looking to find is a data analyst, which there are very few in our market. You're happy to go outside of sectors, so why are you only advertising in the local press? So it's about go to where your audience is and speak directly to them. And then equally, sort of referred to earlier, leveraging your network. So when you do advertise, do get your staff to share it. It's going to share that further and wider. And if you've got people in your business and they belong in your business and they're good in your business, they're likely to know similar people to themselves. You know, birds of a feather flock together and whatever. So actually opening out to those is probably going to attract those similar people. And then finally, just to push on the sort of process side, is design that process with the applicants in mind. Don't design the process with you in mind, or have a fit template. Make sure each stage has a purpose. Not that it's just an opportunity for you to whittle down some more. The amount of times I've been asked to add another process in place. Go, God, this is a great shortlist. I can't make my mind up. Let's have another process. Okay, let's have a coffee meeting with them. Let's bring somebody else on board. When I was preparing this, I stumbled across a stat, which is 83% of applicants may change their mind based on a negative interview process. That's nearly all people are assessing you during that interview process. The other part for me, which I will always say to clients, is make sure it has momentum. Don't be too quick, because you know, if you're asking somebody to do 2 or 3 face-to-face interviews in 1 week, well, actually that's taking time out of their, if they're still working, out of their work diary. But equally, don't let it drag too long. It's a competitive market. If you take too long, you will lose people from that process, and it's usually the one that you want. So once you've got that process, try and stick you know, reasonably quickly to it. And then it's all about communication, keeping them informed at each stage. Again, you know, if you're fitting this around your day-to-day working, it makes it more difficult. If you can't do it, maybe get somebody in your team just to keep those touch points, provide feedback at each stage possible. If you've got some question marks around somebody and you're going, well, I don't know about that, I'm going to quiz them about it. Give them the feedback so that they can potentially work on that, because that's what you'll do. If you'd employed them and you'd said, oh, you know, you didn't do great in this meeting, so and so, the next time, you know, you might want to think about this, this, and this. You can see about that adaptability, because we learn a living, don't we? We don't earn a living necessarily. It's about evolving and developing. If people can take feedback and learn, then they're often the best people. And then finally, when offered, don't just go, right, we're waiting until the day they start. You want to have regular touch points, because nowadays often people are in roles for up to three, have notice period for 3 months, 6 months, some 12 months if it executives. You've got to make sure you're keeping in touch, because other people will be trying to poach them, you know, throughout that process, really. So I've rattled through it, I realise, but
no, that's great, Barry. Thank you very much. I think so often, and I think a lot of what you're saying there is it's the same when you develop any strategy, and recruitment should be no different. It's constantly thinking of why am I having another interview? Why are we recruiting this role? Why are we calling it this? I know we've discussed with the panel before about job titles being insane, and actually sometimes it's okay to advertise a job title as something more generic if that's what you're going to find, even if you're going to call it something different. Do what you can to attract the talent. And where we're flying through time, so I'm going to go to Ellie, and then we've got some questions for the panel already coming through, which is brilliant. Ellie, lovely to have you with us. I know you're going to kind of go through that candidate experience from the agency side.
Yeah, so I'm Ellie. I work for DK Recruitment. I head up the social housing team here. I've worked in the sector for about 12, 13 years. I'd say probably 11 of them are in social housing. I did a year in legal, but I quickly went back to housing. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, everything that Emma and Barry have said is something that I wanted to touch upon anyway. It's really refreshing. I think I said when we last met that Anna and Emma are really putting in the work in order to make the candidate experience the best it can be, and especially in terms of understanding what the recruitment process needs to be for it to happen. So from my perspective, I think we've touched upon it anyway, but the candidate experience, and some organisations in housing are having to be, and understandably so, very systems driven because of sort of large mergers, because of people wanting to collect data, but sometimes these processes can complicate, I suppose, the recruitment process a little bit. I wanted to give some examples of maybe the difficulties I've had with a couple of clients over the last couple of months to give you an understanding of what difficulties a recruiter could have. I had quite a deep conversation with one of the HR managers of one of my clients, and was honest with them and just said, look, we haven't been as successful with you guys as we have been with others. Can I make sure that we're doing as best as we can, and sort of how you actually shortlist CVs, because they use networks as a system. As a recruitment company, we don't have any access to line managers at all. And this is a process for all agencies. And we just get a JD on a system. We are then having to put CVs on a system. The candidates are having to fill out a very complicated application form with a CV. And if I'm honest, people that should be getting interviews aren't getting interviews. And their shortlisting process was crazy, in my opinion. It was like a 3-stage points-based scoring system on just a CV, where about 4 different areas of the business get involved to look at CVs, which is, from my perspective, it is very complicated, and it's a sort of 3-4 week time frame in which you get feedback on CVs. So I think for me, what I want to get to show you guys is that sometimes having those processes are great, but try and be a bit more flexible with it. The best companies that I think that recruit better are the people that have got that little bit of flex, that can speak to line managers. If we can speak to line managers, find out exactly what you're after, not just skills, but also soft skills, personal characteristics. Culture is hugely important. We need to know what culture the organisation is, but also the culture of the team. I think that sometimes gets missed. And I think what Anna and Emma were saying was brilliant. In fact, that they sit down with their line managers and make sure that that's sort of explained to recruiters, but also to the candidates as well. So complicated application forms, I'd say definitely try and reduce that. Matt, I don't know if you have this as well, but I think in the sector, sometimes the barrier that I have is that people want experience. So line managers want experience, but then they want someone who's dynamic and new to the market so they can give new ideas. I don't know if you've come across that as well. And there's quite a disparity of needing experience, wanting someone that's sort of really ambitious, I don't know how to explain it.
No,
I think there
know
is a
what
bit
you
of
mean. I think
disparity.
it goes back a bit to Barry's point, and certainly one that Anna and Emma touched on, which again is that thread of why. You know, what are we actually recruiting for? What is it we want here? Because, and as Anna mentioned, right, well, that's great, but we don't have a 6-figure salary to pull someone in to do all of that stuff. So what do we have? Where do we actually sit? And it's about working with people like yourself and obviously other panelists to kind of go, well, actually, this is what the market's dictating at the moment. And I know certainly I've spoken with a number of people in this room before about, you know, well, actually, I know you want this, but this is where it sits. So where are we giving up some of that thing? And like you said, that's where I think recruitment has had to shift. And, you know, recruitment as a whole industry since COVID has had a huge restructure. Loads of people were made redundant during the pandemic. Lots of new people have come in because businesses suddenly got busy. And I think what you're finding is that consultative approach is becoming ever more needed, but some businesses aren't willing to kind of listen to the consultative approach in the first place. And I mean, I know there's candidates I've spoken with in this room, there's clients I've spoken with this in the room. And I was speaking with somebody yesterday who was pitching a role, and it was very low basic with quite a high commission because it was in a sales kind of position within housing. I said, well, your biggest problem is that the salary isn't going to attract anybody, because as Barry said, the eyes are never going to be seeing it. So if no one's going to, because you're not seeing the 80k potential, you're seeing the 25k basic. So it's about really understanding that this mindset that we used to have, and certainly the mindset I had when I was growing up, which was I should be grateful for getting an interview. I should be grateful for getting put in the door. That whole thing's changed. Businesses are the ones that need to attract talent, and housing the sector isn't very good with its branding, isn't very good with its, you know, putting its head above the parapet and going, actually, what we're doing is great. And so we're struggling for people to even know what the sector is still, even in 2023.
No, definitely. And I think part of the issue is sometimes people don't even know about the sector, or they don't know enough about the sector. I mean, I know from until I sort of recruited in social housing, I was unaware of what social housing was and the different elements that you can work into, and the different areas. And I think as a housing association, you've got such good access to your community. And it's like Barry said, is actually starting your branding and getting the word out there from the start, and people that are coming through apprenticeships, especially for trades and surveyors, and making sure that you're actually going to be taking people on them as they get to market, rather than the private companies, which can pay a little bit more.
100%. And no, there's loads of that happening all across the sector at the moment. Yasmin, I'm going to bring you in because you've got your hand raised for a question, and then I'm going to the chat. We've had a few things raised. So Yasmin, it's lovely to have you with us. I'm hoping you're still there and can dive in.
Sorry, I am still
That's all right.
here.
All good.
I'm just trying to get my techie brain in gear to put my video on.
All good. What's your question, Yasmin?
I don't know if my video came on. Did my video come on?
No, but it's all right.
Okay, sorry, you don't want to see me anyway without my makeup. It's quite scary. Right, what I wanted to ask is, I work for a local authority, okay, and recruitment has gone absolutely bonkers, in that we are having to be subjected to a people resourcing board. So I just wanted to ask, has anybody else had this experience where all your vacancies have to be approved by a people resourcing board?
Yes.
I'll pass to Emma or Anna on that one, because that's more of an internal thing. So Anna, I'll go to you.
So what's happened is, so before we had one process, and it was a quick email. We've got this vacancy, and emails all the directors, and they all say kind of yes. No, first it was a process where I just get the hiring manager will put in a form, a quick, easy to do form, and it goes straight to the director. Director will sign it off. What the business then realized is that actually in some roles we're over invested, and actually, yes, it's a replacement, but actually, do we need that replacement? Which is a little bit annoying, because we thought we can do that, they can do that in a meeting. However, their meetings are once a month, which then we don't want a 5-day recruitment process. So then we now every role is scrutinized. So any new roles, once they're authorized by our exec team, then they don't need to be authorized by the leadership team. So the leadership team are our 8 directors. Now every other role, we've set up a teams kind of a process, so where I'll get the role, the ATR, the authority to recruit form comes in, I go on there and say, can I have your votes? We've got this role, this department, can I all have your votes? If someone doesn't feel that actually so our customers contact team is really struggling at the moment. So if the director thinks that she needs that resource on her team, then they have to bid for it. The hiring director will have to give a reason why, you know, it's crucial they need it for. But yeah, ours kind of gone that they have to discuss, that they all have to talk about it before we kind of go live, and if there is a problem with it, they then take it offline and they need to discuss about it, and then we have to have those 6 signatures out of 8 to go ahead and advertise.
Emma, are you doing something similar?
No, so I've never heard of this people resourcing board in my life, so I'm sorry, I can't help. I guess the way we manage approvals is relatively simple. A manager can put in a request if it's a backfill for somebody. They don't really need any additional approval. We're currently just having senior leaders kind of approve it for that particular department. If there's a new job, then the whole exec team have to kind of decide on it, and there's a business case bid process that needs to be followed for that. But essentially we run an establishment, so a list of posts that are allowed in the budget, and as long as the role is in the budget and the person's left the role, and we have, obviously we're 1,800 people, so we can just kind of go, well, Joe's left, let's replace another Joe. And that doesn't mean to say that we can't say, oh, actually Joe had these skills, but we actually need Jane to have these ones. We can do that, but obviously we don't change the job description every time, because there's usually several hundred people working to that job description, so we can't just change it easily. So it's obviously slightly bigger scale.
No, and this is it, and there's going to be many different ways of process. I know that both come with some advantages and obviously some frustrations. I imagine, Yasmin, is probably the problem if you're trying to get roles signed off.
Absolutely frustrating. It's just gone really, really bonkers. So I work in a contact center. That's my background. And obviously, as you all know, contact center recruitment is fast, furious. You're constantly doing it all the time. And we're having to have all our vacancies signed off constantly. And we're in peak winter. And can you imagine what our KPI stats look like? I wouldn't even dare share them with any of you. Well, but thank you so much. You know what? It's kind of given me a little bit of, not I wouldn't say reassurance, but it's given me some open-ended ideas that maybe I can go back and be a bit pirate and maybe tell him to go a little bit lenient on frontline roles. Thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. There's a few questions in the chat before I come to you, Lisa. I will come to you shortly. So Sarah had said, question for Anna and Emma. You mentioned your recruitment team has grown in response to improve processes, candidate experience, etc. What's your current structure, and do you feel that's working for you? Emma, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, my current structure is as myself, and then I have 3 resourcing specialists who are full-time pretty much. I think I've got a 0.9 in there, and I've got 3 FTE resourcing assistants as well. So we're a team of essentially 6 FTE plus myself. I don't do any operational recruitment. I'm strategic in my approach, so I deal with kind of resourcing strategy, and I'm picking all the hard to fill roles. I'm the voice back to the senior leaders alongside my business partners in HR, saying, some of the things Anna was saying, you can't get tradespeople anymore, so let's just think about what we can do differently. Where's our grow our own agenda at? Can you put some more apprenticeships in the business, please? That kind of thing. So I'm dealing with those issues, and then the team kind of have the 3 specialists. Their main job is to attract external talent into the business, although we do a lot of moving around, of kind of moving kind of people from one role to another. So internal recruitment as well also forms part of the role. So I think in terms of context, we are currently trying to fill 73 vacancies. At our peak at the start of the financial year, it was 120 vacancies from the growth from in the group. So that's why the team maybe seems a little large, but it is very busy. So my lowest, I think this year we've touched 45 people. We've been trying to recruit at any one time. Is the lowest number I've had this year. So.
Busy year for you and the team. Anna, how about yourself?
So we're not as amazing as Emma's team. So we've only got so it's myself and my recruitment assistant, and also I make my ATS company work for us, because they have this service. They don't predominantly kind of tell you about it until you do some research. So we need to get some return on investment. So I've kind of got someone there sourcing, Sana's my recruitment assistant's main role is start to build, get the vacancies through, make sure that we give that great candidate experience. So every candidate shortlisting stage will get an email of why they haven't been shortlisted. So for Sana is kind of looking at that candidate experience and kind of booking in the interviews. Networks, I kind of use them to make sure the adverts are ready, where they're kind of putting our adverts on the right attraction methods. And for me, is more kind of that headhunting, that kind of strategic piece, and kind of getting the line managers on board. We've also got had a, you know, you have to use the resources. You know, you can't recruit anymore. We're quite small. We're only 400 colleagues, but it's also using your comms team. You know, we need a marketeer. We need someone that can do that employer branding, because we know there's some really good stuff in Grand Union. But if you look at our career site, my God, it's appalling. And that's something that we're looking at this year. So we've managed to recruit a digital, well, we're recruiting in January for a digital marketeer. It's going to sit in comms, and we're kind of both sharing it and having a dotted line. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. So it's trying to use the departments that you have and building that case to kind of, okay, you don't want me to bring an extra head, then you need to try and kind of support us in what we want to achieve.
I'm going to go to the wider panel now with a bit of a thread of questions. So rather than asking individually, because where we're moving into like the last 10 minutes or so. So Emily Allman started it by asking about EDI as an ongoing conversation. Can the panel speakers share what they and their teams, organisations are doing to promote greater ED&I? And this was followed up by Chloe from HDN. Related to the above, how do you get a balance between what an existing team and organisational culture might be for a bad, harmful environment for some people, whilst making sure you're not just recruiting the same people into a homogenous team? And Vu has mentioned there, you know, how can we move away from 6-page application forms? Are there more inclusive ways? So it seems like this idea behind ED&I is absolutely massive at the moment. And I'll start with either Barry or Ellie and then move to both Emma and Anna straight afterwards. But Ellie, I mean, you're off mute. You know, in terms of that EDI perspective, because I know you do a lot of work in the built environment as well.
Yes.
You know, how are you finding the methods you've had to change, particularly almost since the pandemic around that, with, I think someone had mentioned about hybrid working and things like that as well?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of hybrid working, it's been such a roller coaster, I guess, of what clients want. I would say that a lot of people are now wanting a lot more people back into the office, but the ability for people to work at home has really helped with all of that, especially with access, travel, and opportunities. It's as an organisation, you've now got access to a lot more people because they don't have to do the commuting, and yeah, it's just a case of organisations being flexible with their employees.
And Barry, from the wider EDI perspective, I know you do a lot of work in that, well, as you mentioned, the exec space as well. This is an ongoing battle, an ongoing challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I think in Emily's thingy, she says there's an ongoing conversation. And my bugbear is it's often just a conversation. I think we talk a lot of good stuff in the sector, but actually when it comes down to it, I think there's a lot more that can actually, a lot more robustness that can be built into that. I think we're quite lucky in that because we're sort of trying to drive the conversation piece, whether it be, you know, in meetings or whether that's sort of on social and whatnot, then we've kind of got a reputation of doing that. And so actually, you know, when it comes to exec roles, we're pretty good at being able to provide a diverse shortlist, whether that be gender, race, sexuality, whatever. But we've worked hard to create that network, and that's where, you know, that's what it all comes down to, a big part of it. I think EDI, when it comes to attraction, is not a sentence at the end of an advert saying we welcome applications from, you know, all parts of society, whatever. It's got to be, you know, from our perspective, we're assessing the sort of the executive team. We're having those open conversations at that point. We're discussing what it is that they feel that they need within the organization, so they're representing their communities. And then because we're managing a long list, we're out there sort of pulling that in, you know, on a daily basis. We're able to look at it on a daily basis and go, actually, we're missing this demographic. Where can we go and find that? And you can be quite proactive and deliberate about it. And we kind of need to at the moment, especially in the executive space. You know, on an annual basis, there's an article in Inside Housing, isn't there, going, this is how many chief executives are female now. This is where we're failing. This is how many chief executives come from BAME background. The other little point I wanted to make on that front is that lots of organisations, all organisations actually, especially in this sector, will have an EDI strategy and will be aware of it. However, when they're engaging with people like us, they very rarely will communicate that with us. Now we have our own approach, but I remember we'd organised an EDI sort of round table before you'd established this, Matt, so we weren't in, sort of take you down.
All good.
And we were chatting. There was a client in there who we'd done a lot of work with, and they got fantastic EDI strategy. I'm going, why aren't you reaching out to your suppliers to explain that? It's all well and good if you're engaging with suppliers to bring people into your organization. You need to communicate that out so that they can help you achieve that strategy.
It's rarely ever communicated to me. Ever,
and this is something I know. I'm going to go to Emma and Anna now, but there's that piece around working. Don't go on collaboratively with your partners, but there's also that piece around from a consultant perspective, saying, look, if you try and go through. I mean, Sophie Hayward put in the chat there about how her, it's meant to be this very, very kind of structured interview, and it ended up being more like a chat for an hour and 40 minutes, and how much more welcome she was with that. If you try and put too many barriers in place, as Ellie had mentioned, with application forms and everything else, you're going to lose people from a neurodiverse background because they're going to get bored and they're just going to walk away. Barry had mentioned earlier about multiple stage interview processes and not knowing why. I've had it myself where I've met 3 people and then they've gone, right, well, we need to come in and meet a 4th. But I've never got feedback from the previous 3 and I don't understand the point in the 4th. So I've just gone, you know what, I'm done. Cheers. Thanks very much. Our candidates are feeling the same, and your candidates, particularly in the housing space, are in a lot of demand at the moment. And when we're looking at an EDI perspective, if we do focus on race or gender for just a moment, it's also, and I challenge every client I work with regularly on this, you can definitely get a panel that isn't all white and male. I don't care what sector it is. You have people in your business who aren't white and male, put them on the interview panel. Just because if you walk in and I've discovered a lot of this, to be honest with you, from speaking to people like Lara, but also my partner who's mixed race. If she walks in and sees an all white male panel, immediately you're a little bit more nervous because you're like, where do I fit? And yet I will never ever face that, no matter who is on that interview panel. And that's just something that we all need to be more and more aware of. Emma, I'm going to come to yourself because I've lost Anna's up there. But anyway, I'll come to yourself anyway first. Just in terms of on the EDI perspective, this must be a big thing for a business of your size.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have, lucky enough, we have a team of 2 for specialise on EDI. It's part of the kind of wider corporate resources team, and I meet with them monthly. We talk about kind of where our underrepresentation is in the business, and I currently have an EDI strategy within resourcing. So currently looking to close a gap we have in the ethnicity group, and then we'll be looking at LGBT, and then we'll be looking at disability in year 3. So there is a high focus on doing that, and what I'm learning is that, like exactly what you said, Matt, is people need to see that we are inclusive externally. When they're researching us as an organisation, they want to see that there's people like them working here already. It's not a strap line on an advert, it's genuine inclusivity, and things like putting content out around the markers like Black History Month or LGBT History Month. We're really good at that internally. We do loads of stuff on that, but I know we're not great at telling the story externally, and that's like a hidden gem. We need to kind of get out there and say, it's really important that people recognise that about platform, that we are really inclusive, and here's some people who actually work here telling you. It's not just me in recruitment telling you this, it's everybody else's lived experience, and those user stories kind of coming out, to those colleague stories coming out and telling the story for us. It's something we're looking at in the next 12 months, is sort of telling those stories a bit more prominently.
Anna, I know this is also a focus for Grand Union. I'm going to come to you in just a second because I know Lisa's had her hand up for quite a while, but I know this is something you're also advocating for, so I will dive back to you in a moment. But Lisa, do please come in. Thank you for being patient, because I was trying to kind of cover everything with the chat as well. So lovely to have you with us today.
No worries. Thanks for letting me come. This is my first roundtable, so I've got loads of questions and notes that I didn't realise that it was interactive. I thought I was just sitting here to listen, so I do apologise.
Don't be at all.
The first one that I wanted to talk about was something Barry said earlier about housing and standards and practices, and how we sort of have a monopoly over people because they're in social housing. I joined social housing 5 years ago. Before that, I was in utilities. I've worked in lots of different sectors. And the utility company that I worked for, they owned all the water supply pipe work. So at that time, the customers couldn't change their water supplier. But the way that the company operated, they just standardized the practices and the customer experience. So although they weren't in competition with anybody else, they operated like they were. And then the shareholders used to monitor our performance and our quality as if we were in competitions and our customers could transfer. So when I come into housing, I sort of expected those sort of standards. And then, well, residents, they can't just move unless they do a mutual exchange and they move to another housing association. I learned very quickly what Barry was saying earlier around we're sort of a bit complacent sometimes in the way that we do things in the sector because there's not competition. So that was the first thing I wanted to say. The other thing I wanted to say is the differences in interview experience. So I was made redundant on the 27th of November, and I've been going to as many interviews as I possibly can just for the experience in all different roles, just to see how different housing associations, local authorities and interview experiences compare. And it's very vast, and I'll tap into what we were talking a minute ago. There's been 2 or 3 stage interviews for coordinator roles, but yet I went for an interview yesterday for a senior management position and it was a 1-step process. So in this sector generally, maybe some sort of framework around what role, where it sits, how much risk is applied to it, how many interviews is deemed appropriate would be beneficial. The next thing I wanted to talk about quickly was also the lack of notes and feedback from interviews in the sector. So out of 5 interviews that I've done in the last couple of weeks, only 1 person sent me back the notes from the interview. Only 1 person separate was clearly making notes at the point of the interview. And what was quite alarming for me is where I couldn't see any notes being taken, some were then coming back to say potentially unsuccessful 2 or 3 days, a week later, with no clearly visible notes to mark me against in a competency-based interview at the time. So I think how we demonstrate how we're interviewing, the standards are, I think you're right, it is a candidate-led market. I was also observing them and how they work whilst they was trying to decide whether I fitted for their company. So I think we just need to be conscious when we're interviewing how we actually come across ourselves.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm aware we're kind of running out of time. I'd love to kind of get in more, but I completely agree with your points there. We've reached 12, so I'm aware if anybody needs to go, please feel, I want to, if any of our panelists need to bounce, please feel free. It's been incredibly grateful for you for the times and an effort you put into kind of bringing this all together today. So I certainly appreciate it. I think, Lisa, you're not alone in actually some of those journeys, and I think it's something that the sector needs to hear more of. People like yourself going, look, all I wanted was feedback so that I can improve. It's a huge piece there, and I think it's an area that the sector as itself needs to kind of value more as well. So I really appreciate the points you've made there. Go on, sorry.
Okay, the other thing I was going to say is with lots of restructures going on at the moment in the sector, and also there being a skills gap, how many recruiters or internal talent acquisitions companies are finding that their TA teams are working alongside their change process teams? Because on the day that I was made redundant, there was 3 people made redundant that day. They lost 60 years experience in one day for the efficiency saving that needed to be made. There wasn't a path for us to go. There was ring-fenced roles that we could apply for, but from now interviewing outside externally, the external interviews have been much easier for new roles than what they were to try and switch to an internal role. So I am quite interested to hear from TAs how closely they're working with change teams within the organisations in terms of, is there really a need to advertise outside? Could you just develop somebody existing? Is there a development pathway?
Yeah, I think a lot do. I mean, Emma and Anna, I don't know if there's anything you want to quickly touch on either of those, in terms of that point of redundancy and how that looks.
happy to just jump in on that one. So we do quiz the manager about whether there's some successor or at least some internal talent that could be used to fulfill this particular role. And obviously, eventually we figure out where the external hire might need to be. It might not be in that particular role because we've moved some internal talent around. You know, it's quite a large, complex organisation, so they don't always know about the talent that's in other parts of the organisation. But certainly the HR teams that are dealing with redundancies and restructures work closely with myself, and I'm sure that's common across you know the rest of the sector, but making sure we minimise redundancies where we can, and we're also kind of informing the change management programme a little bit around when they say we're going to bring in expertise for fixed term contracts, and we're like, that's going to be really challenging to do that. You know, these experts are highly sought after. So yeah, there is relationships there forming.
I think it depends on how strong your internal talent acquisition team is and their voice at table, Anna. And I think that goes back to what you're saying earlier, doesn't it?
I agree.
No, totally agree. Lisa, you know, really sorry to hear what you're going through, but we have that foot in the door when anything happens, a restructure, recruit talent acquisition are there. They have those meetings, but also a big part HR are there because they're the kind of the ground, the eyes and ears. They're on the floor, as I say, and we're all there, and we all have those conversations. We have an internal talent pool where we see, you know, kind of our shiny stars, are people kind of struggling or, you know, underperforming, and how we help them, and then you know, and how we kind of support them, so we kind of know who's there. So we're part of those conversations.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. Emily, I'm going to bring you in because I know you had a quick final point before we wrap up today.
Yeah, no, it's just really to come back on some of the points that were raised around the ED&I agenda and recruitment, and I come at this from the perspective of having been both a candidate but also having done a number of hiring processes as the hiring manager or hiring director, and I think there's a lot of things that organisations can do both with their own talent acquisition teams and when working with agencies. And Barry talked a lot about how sometimes organisations are not great about communicating the good things that they're doing and the emphasis that they've got if they have an ED&I strategy, and the work that goes alongside that. But for me, some of the really fascinating stuff is actually looking at some of the data around staff turnover, breaking that down by characteristics. You know, looking at, okay, if you've got people who are leaving your teams, what are their backgrounds? When you're recruiting new people in, what are their backgrounds? And it can be really startling. You can pick up on trends that you just didn't realize existed because no one had put two and two together. And then I you know, I've known Barry for a while, so I was not surprised to hear that he and his team work really, really hard to ensure that they are presenting their client organizations with diverse list of candidates. I suppose for me, the next step and the challenge is, how do you then help those client organizations not to fall into the kind of the group thinking and the unconscious bias thinking that then skews those short lists, kind of, you know, the next stage down from the long lists, further back towards a less diverse candidate pool. And it's kind of how do agencies encourage and work with their client organizations to avoid those pitfalls?
And that's where it comes down to, and this is just me speaking from my side, you know, it comes down to trust, and it comes down to having a true, genuine relationship of working with your client. There are businesses out there, and we haven't talked too much really in terms of how to work with agencies today, which is ironic, bear in mind the panel, but you know, there is a piece there around going, well, actually, am I a consultant for you? And are you paying me for my knowledge and insight? Or do you want me just to be a job board for you? And if you want me to just be a job board, then I can do that. But realistically, that isn't where my expertise lies. And there is that piece around being also very honest and authentic with yourself and kind of saying, actually, you know what, we're a business that, you know, there are businesses out there go, oh, well, we need more female leaders, and they recruit female leaders, but the environment isn't suited to a female leader at all. Their voices are shut down, and therefore you don't get anywhere. So it's about being very honest and authentic with your actual business yourself. And I can see Rachel Meekins just put in the chat there, really interesting to hear everyone. Anna and Emma, you sound like you've done some great work in-house to improve and give some really good insights. Definitely processes, systems and candidate experience is key. Communication, as Anna said, is also really important, but getting out of being reactive to proactive and understanding how to be marketeers, especially around EDI, is a huge area we need to focus on. And I know it's something that it's great to hear that Emma's gone, well, we've got a strategy. We know where we are, but we also know we can't change it overnight. Anna, I know you're doing the same with Grand Union. You're thinking of a wider strategy to really try and implement change, but it starts with culture. So I'm aware it's 12:07 and everybody's kind of going, Matt, like, we need to get going. So I just want to say a big thank you to you all for joining, particularly our guest speakers today. Next week is a bit of a different tack, but not hugely. We're talking about LGBTQ in housing, and particularly in relation to recruitment and other areas like that. So if you can join us, please register. But for now, just a massive thank you to everyone for joining, and I look forward to seeing you all at a future roundtable. Do obviously reach out to any of the panel if you've any further questions. But for now, thanks very much.
Thanks, Matt.
Cheers all.
Bye.